Lucia had perfected the art of invisibility. As a palace maid, she poured wine, scrubbed floors, and existed in the background of other people's lives, until the day Alpha Kael chose her. Not for love, at least not at first, but as a desperate strategy to avoid a marriage trap set by a rival Alpha. 1 month. That's all the time she has to learn everything a Luna should know, to transform from servant to sovereign, to convince the world she belongs beside the most powerful Alpha in the territory. But Kael never expected her brilliance, her strength, the way she'd make him question everything he thought he knew about duty and desire. And when Alpha Rex arrives with his furious daughter and impossible demands, it's Lucia, the maid no one believed in, who holds the fate of 2 packs in her trembling hands. Before we get into the story, do well to hit the subscribe button. Now let's get in. Chapter 1. The Proposal. The parchment crackled between Kael's fingers, the wax seal of Alpha Rex still warm against his palm. He read the words a second time, though they hadn't changed. Rex was coming. 4 weeks. The annual trade negotiations that kept both their territories fed through harsh winters and prosperous through abundant summers. "You're frowning." His mother's voice cut through the silence of his study, sharp as always. She moved like water across the stone floor, her presence filling the room before she'd even reached his desk. "What does he want this time?" Kael set the letter down, his jaw tight. "The usual trade routes, supply agreements." He paused, meeting her eyes. "He mentions bringing his daughter." His mother's expression shifted, something knowing and dangerous flickering there. "Ah. It's nothing. It's never nothing with Rex." She crossed her arms, and Kael caught the scent of lavender and steel that had always meant home, meant safety. He joked about it last year, about uniting the packs through marriage. You laughed it off then. "I'm laughing now." "Are you?" Her gaze pinned him. "Because if he makes that alliance a condition of fair trade, we'll be negotiating from our knees." The council chamber smelled of old wood and wolf musk 3 days later, thick and familiar. Kael sat at the head of the table, half listening to Elder Garrett drone on about grain storage and winter preparations. His mind kept circling back to his mother's words, to the trap Rex might be laying. Movement caught his eye. Lucia refilling Lord Brennan's wine cup with steady hands. Her head was bowed, dark hair braided simply, but her eyes, he'd noticed before her eyes tracked everything. She shifted to the next council member, and Kael watched as her gaze flickered briefly to Elder Garrett, then to the maps spread across the table. Not the empty stare of someone simply serving, something sharper, hungrier. How long had she been doing that? Listening, learning. The matter of Alpha Rex's visit requires discussion. His mother's voice pulled the room's attention like a lodestone. She sat to his right, regal even in her simplicity. "He arrives in less than 3 weeks." Lord Brennan grunted. "Same negotiations as always, I expect." "Perhaps." His mother's fingers drummed once against the table. "Or perhaps he'll seek to complicate matters." The council members exchanged glances. Kael felt the shift in the room, the way wolves scented danger on the wind. "There are rumors," Elder Garrett said carefully, "that Rex hopes to strengthen ties between our packs through marriage." "His daughter is of age," another council member added, "and unwed." Kael's hands tightened on the arms of his chair. Lucia moved along the far wall now, near the door, but he could feel her attention even from across the room. His mother leaned forward, which is why Kael must act first. The room went still. "You need to choose a mate," she said, her voice carrying the weight of finality. "Announce it to this council within the month before Rex arrives. It removes his leverage entirely." Kael's throat tightened. He'd known this conversation would come eventually, just not today, not like this. "Lady Marian would be an excellent choice," Lord Brennan offered immediately. "Her father controls half the Western territories, wealthy, influential, and she's beautiful," another council member finished. "Tall, perfect bearing for a Luna." The words piled on top of him like stones. Kael had met Marian twice. She'd looked through him both times, her eyes calculating his worth like he was livestock at market. "Kael," his mother's voice softened slightly, "what do you think?" He thought of cold ambition, of political arrangements, of waking up every morning next to someone who saw him as a title, not a man. His gaze drifted, unbidden, across the chamber. Lucia had gone motionless by the door, the wine pitcher forgotten in her hands. "I have someone else in mind," he heard himself say. The council chamber erupted in murmurs. His mother's head snapped toward him. "Who?" she demanded. Kael's heart hammered against his ribs. Insanity. This was insanity. But the words came anyway, steady and sure. "Lucia." The pitcher slipped from Lucia's fingers. It hit the stone floor with a crack that shattered the stunned silence, wine spreading like blood across gray rock. Every eye turned to her. She stood frozen, her face drained of color, hands trembling at her sides. His mother recovered first. Kael, a word alone. They left the council chamber with its shocked whispers, his mother's grip iron on his arm until they reached the corridor. "Have you lost your mind?" she hissed. "She's a maid, the daughter of a poor wolf. Marion is." "Exactly what you want," Kael cut in. "Not what I need." "And you think a palace servant is what you need?" "Yes," the certainty surprised even him. "She's intelligent, kind. She treats everyone with respect, not because they have rank, but because it's right. I've watched her, Mother, really watched her." His mother's eyes narrowed. "How long?" "Does it matter?" "It matters if you're confusing infatuation with." "It's not infatuation." His voice dropped low. "Trust me on this, please." Something in his tone made her pause. She studied his face, and he watched the moment she understood. This wasn't impulse. Whatever he felt for Lucia, it had roots. "She'll be terrified," his mother said finally. "I know. The council will resist." "Let them." His mother exhaled slowly, then turned back toward the chamber. "Then we'd better go tell her before she runs." Lucia hadn't moved. She stood in the same spot, wine still pooled around her feet, looking like the world had just shifted beneath her, and she didn't know which way was up anymore. Kael approached slowly, aware of every eye watching. He stopped an arm's length away. "Lucia," he said quietly, "I need to speak with you." She lifted her gaze to his, and he saw it there, fear and confusion and something else. Something that made his chest tighten. "Yes, Alpha," she whispered. And everything changed. Chapter 2, A Month of Preparation. Lucia's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd been dismissed from the council chamber with instructions to report to the Alpha's private study at dawn. And now she stood outside his door as pale morning light crept through the corridor windows, her heart a wild thing beating against her ribs. This couldn't be real. Alphas didn't choose maids. Didn't look twice at daughters of poor wolves who scrubbed floors and poured wine and disappeared into the background like smoke. The door opened before she could knock. Kael stood there, and the sight of him this close, without the buffer of her duties, without the safety of her invisibility, stole the breath from her lungs. He wore simple training clothes, not the formal attire of yesterday's council meeting, and somehow that made it worse, more intimate. "You came," he said. As if she'd had a choice. "Yes, Alpha." "Kael," his voice gentled. "When we're alone, just Kael." Her throat closed. She managed a nod. He stepped aside, gesturing her into a room she'd cleaned 100 times but never truly seen. Books lined the walls. Maps covered a broad table. The scent of pine and something darker, something distinctly him, wrapped around her. "I know you're frightened," Kael said, closing the door. "I know this is." "Insane," the word escaped before she could stop it. Horror flooded her immediately. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "It's insane," he agreed, and the corner of his mouth lifted. "Completely, but necessary." Necessary, right, because this wasn't about her at all, just strategy, just politics. The thought shouldn't have stung. "My mother explained the situation," he asked. Lucia nodded. The Queen Mother had found her in her quarters last night, laid out the entire scheme with clinical precision. Alpha Rex, his daughter, the marriage trap. 4 weeks to transform a maid into a convincing Luna, just long enough to fool a neighboring Alpha and secure fair trade terms. Then you understand, Kael continued, moving to the table. We have a month to make this believable. A month to turn me into something I'm not. His gaze snapped to hers, sharp enough to cut. No, a month to show you what you already are. Before she could process that, he'd spread a document across the table. Pack lineages, territory maps, trade agreements she'd heard discussed but never fully understood. We start with this, he said. The first week was agony. Lucia stumbled through lessons on pack hierarchy, her tongue thick around names of wolves she'd served but never spoken to as equals. Kael corrected her posture a dozen times, shoulders back, chin up, meet their eyes, until her body ached from the unfamiliar rigidity of it. A Luna doesn't apologize for taking up space, he told her on the third day, when she'd automatically stepped aside to let him pass in his own study. I'm a maid, she shot back, exhausted. We're trained to be invisible. You're not invisible to me. The words hung between them, heavy with something she didn't dare name. You never were. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to understand why he'd looked at her in that council chamber like she mattered. But he'd already moved on to the next lesson, and the moment slipped away. The dancing lesson nearly broke her. Kael's mother had insisted, a Luna must know the formal dances, must move with grace at state functions. They'd cleared space in the study, and Kael had extended his hand with an expression she couldn't read. I don't know how, Lucia whispered. I'll teach you. His palm was warm against hers. His other hand settled at her waist, and suddenly the air felt too thin. He smelled like winter forests and something wild, and she was painfully aware of every place their bodies almost touched. Follow my lead, he murmured. 1, 2, 3. Her feet tangled immediately. She lurched forward, gravity claiming her, but Kael's arms were already there. He caught her against his chest, steadying her with a strength that made her feel weightless. I've got you, he said quietly. Her cheek pressed against his shoulder. His heart beat steady beneath her ear, and for one stolen moment she let herself pretend this was real, that she belonged here, in his arms, in his world. Again, she managed, pulling back. This time, she didn't fall. The second week, something shifted. Lucia began anticipating his questions, drawing on all those council meetings she'd observed in silence. When he asked about grain distribution, she referenced a strategy Elder Garrett had proposed 2 seasons ago. When he tested her on territorial disputes, she recalled Lord Brennan's exact words from a heated debate. Kael's eyes lit with something like wonder. You've been paying attention. Always, she admitted. I just never thought it mattered what a maid knew. It matters. His hand covered hers on the table, brief and warm. You matter. She studied late into the nights now, poring over documents Kael left for her, filling the gaps in her knowledge. But he noticed. Of course he noticed. When did you last sleep? He asked one afternoon, finding her swaying over a treaty agreement. I'm fine. Lucia, he gently removed the parchment from her grip. You'll make yourself sick. There's so much I don't know. And you're learning faster than anyone I've ever trained. His fingers brushed her cheek, and she realized with mortification that she'd been about to fall asleep standing up. Rest, that's not a request. He guided her to the chair by the window, and she was too tired to protest. The late afternoon sun warmed her face. Somewhere distant, she heard him moving around the study, the scratch of his quill, the rustle of maps. Safe sounds, peaceful sounds. When she woke, a blanket covered her shoulders and evening had fallen. Kael sat at his desk, reading by candlelight, his profile sharp and beautiful against the darkness. He glanced up, caught her watching. Better. Lucia nodded, something loosening in her chest. He'd let her sleep, covered her, kept working in silence so she could rest. Like she mattered, like she was more than a tool in his political game. From the doorway, neither of them noticed the Queen Mother watching, her expression softening as she observed her son tuck the blanket more securely around the sleeping maid's shoulders before returning to his work. Chapter 3, Walls Coming Down. The package sat on Lucia's small desk when she returned to her quarters after another grueling day of lessons. Plain brown paper, tied with simple twine. No note, but she knew. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped it. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, the kind she'd seen in Kael's study, with cream pages and a ribbon marker. Not ornate, not expensive, but perfect. She'd mentioned it once, barely a whisper during a late evening session 2 weeks ago. They'd been reviewing trade agreements, and she'd said something about wishing she had a place to organize her thoughts, to make sense of everything she was learning. He'd nodded absently, and she'd assumed he hadn't heard. But he had. He'd heard everything. Lucia pressed the journal to her chest, and something cracked open inside her. This wasn't duty. This wasn't strategy. This was Kael seeing her, really seeing her and remembering. She found him in his study an hour later, moonlight spilling through the windows. "Thank you," she said quietly from the doorway. He looked up from his papers, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "You're welcome." "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." He set down his quill. "Stay unless you're tired." She should leave, should maintain some distance, some protective barrier between them. But her feet carried her forward anyway, drawn like a moth to flame. They talked until the candles burned low. About everything. Nothing. Kael told her about his father's death, the weight of leadership settling on shoulders too young to bear it. She spoke of her childhood, of a mother who'd died bringing her into the world, a father who'd worked himself to exhaustion trying to provide. "I was 7 when he passed," Lucia said, staring at her hands. "I've been alone since then." "You're not alone now." Kael's voice was rough. "I won't let you be alone again." The promise hung between them, terrifying and beautiful. "Why me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "There are dozens of suitable wolves. Marion would have given you everything politically." "Marion would have given me nothing that matters." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. "I've watched you for 2 years, Lucia. The way you speak to the kitchen staff with the same respect you show the council. How you notice when someone's struggling and help without being asked. Your kindness isn't performance, it's who you are." Her throat tightened. "That doesn't make me queen material." "It makes you exactly what this pack needs." His hand found hers, tentative, testing. "What I need. Someone who leads with compassion, who sees people, not just pieces on a board. You have more wisdom in your smallest finger than most wolves acquire in a lifetime." "You barely know me." "I know you better than you think." His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending heat racing up her arm. "I know you're terrified right now. I know you think you're not enough. But Lucia, you've always been enough. You just needed someone to see it." She looked at their joined hands, at the impossibility of an alpha holding a maid like she was precious, like she was his equal. "I see you too," she whispered. "Not just the alpha, the man who stays up too late worrying about his pack, who carries his father's legacy like armor he can't remove, who's kinder than he lets anyone know." Something shifted in his expression, raw, vulnerable. "Lucia." A knock shattered the moment. Kael pulled back, and the loss of his warmth felt like winter. "Enter," he called. Thomas, another palace servant, stepped inside. His gaze flickered to Lucia with barely concealed disdain. "Pardon the interruption, Alpha. The kitchens need direction for tomorrow's." He paused. "Though perhaps the maid could handle such trivial matters since she's playing dress-up now." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Kael rose slowly, and Lucia had never seen him look so dangerous. Pure alpha radiated from him, dominance rolling off in waves that made Thomas stumble back. "You will address her as Lucia," Kael said, his voice deadly quiet. "Or better yet, as your future Luna. And you will show her the respect that position demands, or you'll find yourself reassigned to the furthest border outpost we have. Am I clear?" Thomas's face went white. "Yes, Alpha. I apologize, I didn't mean." "Get out." The servant fled. Silence crashed down. "You didn't have to do that," Lucia said, her heart pounding. "Yes, I did." Kael turned to her, still tense with anger. No one disrespects you, not in my presence, not anywhere. The fierceness in his protection undid her. This wasn't political convenience. This was personal. This was Kael claiming her as his in front of witnesses, consequences be damned. Thank you, she managed. His expression softened. Always. From the corridor outside, the Queen Mother stood in shadow, having come to retrieve a forgotten document. She'd heard everything. Watched her son defend the maid with a ferocity he'd never shown for Marion or any other suitable match. But it was what she saw the next morning that truly changed her mind. Lucia, dressed in her old maid's clothes, sat in the servants' quarters with young Anna, who'd been crying. The girl's mother was ill, and there was no coin for medicine. Here, Lucia said, pressing something into Anna's hand. It's not much, but it should help. I can't take your wages. You can, and you will. Lucia's smile was gentle. We take care of each other, that's what pack means. The Queen Mother watched Lucia embrace the weeping girl, watched her give away money she desperately needed herself, and something old and protective stirred in her chest. Perhaps her son had chosen better than she'd known. Perhaps this maid understood what it meant to be queen better than any noble ever could. Chapter 4. Before the council. The morning arrived like an execution. Lucia stood in the Queen Mother's chambers, staring at the gown laid across the bed. Deep sapphire silk that caught the light like water, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that spoke of ancient wolf lineage. Royal attire. Luna attire. Not meant for her. Stop looking at it like it'll bite, the Queen Mother said, though her tone lacked its usual sharpness. Something had shifted between them over the past week, a thawing Lucia didn't quite understand but didn't dare question. I've never worn anything like this. Then it's time you learned. The older woman lifted the gown with careful hands. Come, we haven't got all day. The transformation took hours. Servants Lucia had worked beside for years now attended her, their expressions ranging from supportive to envious. The gown fit perfectly. Kael's mother must have had it made weeks ago, which meant she'd known, even through her resistance, that this moment would come. Hands braided Lucia's hair in intricate patterns reserved for high-ranking wolves. Silver combs, real silver, were woven through the dark strands. Someone painted her lips with subtle color, lined her eyes to make them luminous. When they finally stepped back, Lucia barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Well, the Queen Mother said quietly, look at you. Lucia turned, and something flickered across the older woman's face. Wonder, approval, perhaps even the beginning of affection. He chose well, Kael's mother murmured, almost to herself. Then, louder, you look every inch a queen, child, now you must believe it. I don't know if I can. You can. Strong hands gripped Lucia's shoulders. I've watched you these past weeks, watched how hard you've worked, how you treat everyone with dignity, even those who have scorned you. Watched my son look at you like you're his true north. Her voice softened. He needs you more than he's ever needed anyone. Tears threatened, but Lucia blinked them back. What if I fail him? What if you don't? The council chamber felt different this time. Lucia entered on the Queen Mother's arm, and every head turned. The silence was deafening. She'd served these wolves countless times, poured their wine, cleared their plates, existed in their peripheral vision like furniture. Now they stared. Lord Brennan's jaw went slack. Elder Garrett straightened in his seat. Even the skeptical ones couldn't hide their shock at the transformation. But Lucia's eyes found only one person. Kael stood at the head of the table, and when he saw her, everything else ceased to exist. His expression cracked open, unguarded and raw. He looked at her like she was the sun breaking through storm clouds, like she was everything. She crossed the room on trembling legs, and he met her halfway. His hand extended, and she took it, his warmth anchoring her. You're breathtaking, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. Heat flooded her cheeks. It's just the dress. No, his thumb traced her knuckles. It's you, it's always been you. He turned to face the council, keeping her hand in his. I've gathered you here to make an announcement, Kael said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. I've chosen my mate, my Luna, and I present her to you now, Lucia, daughter of Marcus, who has served this pack with honor and grace." Murmurs erupted. Some faces showed pleasure, others doubt. "She's a maid," someone said, Lord Thuron, whose opinions had always carried too much weight. "She's brilliant," Kael countered. "Compassionate, strong, everything this pack needs in a queen." "She has no political connections," another council member argued. "No wealth, no." "She has my complete faith." Kael's voice cut through the objections like a blade. "She has proven herself worthy in every way that matters, and she will have your respect, or you will answer to me." The dominance in his tone left no room for argument. One by one, the council members bowed their heads in acknowledgement, though some clearly did so through gritted teeth. Elder Garrett stood. "If our Alpha has chosen, then we support his choice. Welcome, Lucia. May you lead us with wisdom." Others echoed the sentiment. Not all of them meant it, but it was enough. The meeting dissolved into congratulations and thinly veiled assessments. Lucia smiled until her face ached, answering questions with the poise Kael had trained into her, feeling his steady presence at her side. But when they finally escaped to the corridor, she rounded on him. "This is still just an arrangement, isn't it?" The words burst out. "For Alpha Rex, for the negotiations. After that, I go back to—" "No," Kael caught her arms, his eyes fierce. "Is that what you think, that this is performance?" "Isn't it?" "Lucia," he pulled her closer, and she could feel his heart racing against her palms. "I love you. I've loved you for longer than I can admit without sounding insane. This stopped being an arrangement the moment I said your name in that council chamber." The world tilted. "You, what?" "I love you," he repeated, each word deliberate. "Your kindness, your strength, the way you see people's hearts, the way you fought so hard to become what you already were. I love all of it, all of you." Tears spilled over despite her best efforts. "I'm falling for you too, but Kael, I'm terrified. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail the pack? What if—" He kissed her, soft and desperate and achingly gentle. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious, irreplaceable. Lucia's fingers tangled in his shirt, pulling him closer, and for one perfect moment, nothing else existed. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "You will never face anything alone," he whispered. "Not the council, not Alpha Rex, not your fears. I'm with you, always, do you understand?" She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion choking her. "Say it," he urged. "Say you'll be mine, not for politics, not for strategy, for real, forever." "Yes," Lucia breathed. "Yes." He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face in his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Safe, cherished, home. Neither of them saw the Queen Mother watching from the shadows, a soft smile on her face. Her son had found his queen. And despite everything, she was perfect. Chapter 5. The Arrival of Alpha Rex. The horns sounded at midday, their deep brass notes echoing across the valley. Lucia stood at the window of Kael's chambers, their chambers now, though she still couldn't quite believe it, and watched the procession wind through the forest path. Alpha Rex traveled like a conqueror. 50 wolves flanked his carriage, banners snapping in the wind, the whole display designed to intimidate, to remind everyone of his power, his reach, his ability to crush those who displeased him. Kael's hand settled at the small of her back. "Breathe." She hadn't realized she'd stopped. "He brought an army." "He brought an escort." His lips brushed her temple. "And you've trained for this, you're ready." Was she? Lucia smoothed her hands over the emerald gown, another gift from the Queen Mother, who'd overseen every detail of her preparation this morning with meticulous care. The color brought out the gold in her skin, made her eyes luminous. Royal, regal. Everything she'd never been. "What if I make a mistake?" she whispered. Kael turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. "Then we fix it together. But Lucia, you won't. I've seen you command a room full of skeptical council members. This is just another performance." Except it wasn't. This was the moment that justified everything. the masquerade that would secure their pack's future. "And his daughter?" she asked. Something dark flickered in Kael's eyes. "Let me handle her." The great hall had been transformed. Banners bearing both pack sigils hung from the rafters. Long tables groaned under elaborate dishes, a feast meant to honor their guests and showcase their prosperity. Every detail calculated. Lucia waited in the side chamber with the Queen Mother, her stomach a nest of vipers. "You look pale," the older woman observed. Queens don't show fear." "I'm not a queen yet." "You are the moment you walk through those doors." She adjusted Lucia's necklace, sapphires that had belonged to Kael's grandmother. "My son chose you. I've accepted you. Now you must accept yourself." Before Lucia could respond, the doors opened. Kael stood there, devastating in formal attire, and the look he gave her drove every thought from her mind. "Ready?" he asked, extending his hand. She took it, felt his strength flow into her. "Ready." They entered together. The hall fell silent. Alpha Rex stood at the center with his entourage, a massive wolf of a man with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. Beside him stood his daughter. Lucia's breath caught. The woman was stunning, tall and willowy, with honey gold hair cascading down her back and features so perfect they looked carved. She wore crimson silk that hugged every curve, and her smile was confident, victorious. She looked at Kael like he was already hers. "Alpha Kael," Rex's voice boomed. "Always a pleasure. I trust you received my message about bringing my Seraphina." He gestured to his daughter with paternal pride. "She's been eager to see your territory again." Seraphina stepped forward, her movements liquid grace. "Alpha Kael, it's been too long." Her gaze slid dismissively past Lucia. "I wasn't aware you'd be entertaining other guests." The subtle insult hung in the air. Lucia felt Kael tense beside her. "Actually," Kael said, his voice carrying across the hall, "allow me to introduce someone very important." He drew Lucia forward, his hand possessive at her waist. "This is Lucia, my mate, my Luna, my queen." The silence was absolute. Seraphina's perfect smile froze. Her eyes, pale blue, ice gold, locked onto Lucia, and for one heartbeat the mask slipped. Rage, humiliation, pure venom. Then she recovered, the smile returning brittle and sharp. "How unexpected." Kael raised Lucia's hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was tender, public, unmistakable. "A pleasant surprise, I'm sure you'll agree," he said smoothly. Lucia watched Seraphina's facade crack further. The other woman's fingers clenched in her skirts, knuckles white. When their eyes met, the look Seraphina gave her was a blade, a promise of retribution, of consequences, of wars fought in shadows. "This isn't over," that look said. "You've humiliated me, and you'll pay." Lucia lifted her chin, refusing to look away first. Queens don't show fear. Alpha Rex recovered faster, though his jovial expression had cooled considerably. "Well, congratulations are in order, it seems." His gaze assessed Lucia with predatory interest. "Though I must say, this is quite the surprise. I hadn't heard any announcements." "We prefer privacy in personal matters," Kael replied, his tone pleasant but firm. "Indeed," Rex's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How very convenient, given the timing of my visit." The accusation beneath the words was clear. He knew, or suspected. Either way, his marriage scheme had crumbled, and the fury beneath his diplomatic veneer was palpable. "Shall we discuss the trade agreements?" Kael suggested. "I'm sure you're eager to begin negotiations after your long journey." "Oh yes," Rex's voice hardened. "I'm very eager indeed." They moved to the council chamber, and Lucia felt the shift immediately. Rex had come expecting leverage, expecting to dangle his daughter as bait for favorable terms. Now, stripped of that advantage, he'd become something more dangerous. Desperate men made ruthless bargains. "Let's revisit the grain shipments," Rex began, his tone sharp. "I believe a 60-40 split in my favor would be fair, given the risk my pack takes transporting through contested territory." "That's a 15% increase from last year," Elder Garrett protested. Costs have risen. Rex smiled coldly. Unless you'd prefer to find another trading partner, though I doubt any would match our generosity. Kael's jaw tightened. You're asking for terms that would cripple our reserves. I'm asking for fair compensation. Rex leaned back, utterly confident. Of course, if you find my terms unreasonable, we can always renegotiate, perhaps over a longer timeline. Say, 5 years of reduced shipments while you find alternatives. The threat was clear. Agree to exploitation or starve. Lucia's mind raced, fragments of council meetings flickering through her memory. There had to be something, some precedent, some strategy. Serafina, seated beside her father, caught Lucia's eye and smiled. Slow, poisonous. Enjoying this, the smile said. And Lucia realized this was personal now. Rex wanted revenge for his failed scheme, and his daughter wanted blood for her public humiliation. They would squeeze Kael's pack dry and call it business. Chapter 6, The Negotiation. The council chamber felt like a tomb. Maps covered the table, territorial boundaries marked in ink that might as well have been blood. Alpha Rex sat across from Kael, predatory satisfaction gleaming in his eyes as he watched his opponent's options narrow. The tariffs on iron ore would also need adjustment, Rex continued, his tone casual but his intent vicious. A 40% increase seems reasonable, given current market fluctuations. Lord Brennan's face reddened. That's highway robbery. That's economics. Rex's smile was all teeth. Supply and demand, Lord Brennan. Surely you understand basic principles. Lucia sat rigid beside Kael, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room, but none more pointed than Serafina's. The other woman lounged in her chair with affected boredom, examining her nails like the fate of 2 packs was beneath her notice. But every few moments, those ice-blue eyes would flick to Lucia with calculated malice. Of course, Serafina said, her voice honey-sweet poison. Perhaps the complexities of trade negotiations are overwhelming for some. Her gaze landed on Lucia. Those of us raised in leadership understand these matters from birth, but I'm sure our new Luna is doing her best to follow along. Heat crawled up Lucia's neck. The dismissal was surgical, publicly acknowledging her title while gutting any authority it carried. Kael's hand found hers beneath the table, a brief squeeze of support. But his attention remained locked on Rex, trapped in a negotiation spiraling toward disaster. The iron tariffs are already fair, Kael said, his voice tight with controlled anger. What you're proposing would devastate our smiths. Then perhaps your smiths need to adapt. Rex leaned forward. Or perhaps you need to reconsider what you're willing to sacrifice for this alliance. After all, my pack could simply redirect our trade routes. We have other options. The threat landed like a blow. Without Rex's trade routes, Kael's pack would struggle through the winter. Food shortages, supply deficits, weakened defenses. Rex knew it. Everyone knew it. I'm sure accommodations can be made, Rex continued, magnanimous now that he'd drawn blood. We're reasonable wolves. We simply want what's fair. Fair, the word tasted like ash. Lucia's mind raced through everything she'd learned, every council meeting she'd observed from the shadows. There had to be something, some precedent, some strategy. Wait. 3 years ago, a dispute with the Eastern Pack over fishing rights. Lord Brennan had been ready to concede, but Elder Garrett had suggested something different, a historical precedent, an old treaty that. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was risky. She could be wrong, could humiliate herself and undermine Kael in front of his greatest rival. But doing nothing meant watching Rex bleed them dry. Lucia's hand moved before doubt could stop her. She tapped Kael's arm, light but insistent. He turned immediately, and she saw the question in his eyes. Trust warred with concern. He didn't want her hurt, but he'd also promised to treat her as his equal. May I speak? She asked quietly. Every conversation in the room died. Alpha Rex's eyebrows rose. Serafina's expression turned venomous. Kael didn't hesitate. The floor is yours, my Luna. Lucia stood, her legs steadier than she'd expected. She met Rex's gaze directly, the way Kael had taught her. Queens don't show fear. Alpha Rex, your concerns about fair compensation are valid, she began, her voice clear. However, I believe there's a precedent that addresses this exact situation. Rex's eyes narrowed. Oh. The Treaty of White Ridge, signed 63 years ago between your grandfather and Alpha Kael's great-uncle. She'd read it during one of her late-night study sessions, barely understanding its significance then. Now it clicked into place like a key in a lock. It established baseline tariffs for all traded goods, with a clause stating that increases exceeding 30% in any single negotiation require documented evidence of extraordinary circumstances. Silence. Rex's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Lucia pressed on, adrenaline singing through her veins. You've proposed increases of 40 to 60% without providing such documentation. Which means, by the treaty your own grandfather signed, the current terms remain binding unless you can prove extraordinary circumstances justify the changes. She paused, letting the words settle. Can you provide that proof, Alpha Rex? The silence stretched taut as a drawn bowstring. Rex stared at her, and she watched calculations flash across his face. He couldn't produce evidence that didn't exist, and breaking a treaty signed by his own grandfather would damage his reputation with every neighboring pack. He'd been outmaneuvered by a maid. The White Ridge Treaty, Rex said slowly, hasn't been invoked in decades. But it's never been dissolved, Elder Garrett interjected, catching on immediately, which means it's still legally binding. Kael's hand found Lucia's beneath the table again, but this time it was pure pride in his grip. Rex's expression darkened. For a long moment, Lucia thought he might flip the table, might let rage override politics. But then his shoulders relaxed fractionally, the concession of a wolf who knew when he'd lost. It seems, he said, his voice like gravel, that your new Luna is better versed in history than I anticipated. She's full of surprises, Kael said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. Indeed, Rex's smile was blade-thin. Very well, we'll honor the existing terms with the standard 5% adjustment for inflation, nothing more. Relief swept through the room. Lord Brennan looked ready to cheer. Elder Garrett nodded approval. But Lucia's gaze caught on Seraphina, and what she saw there made her blood run cold. The other woman's beautiful face had twisted into something ugly, pure hatred, barely concealed behind a mask of composure. You'll regret this, those eyes promised. I'll make you regret this. Then Seraphina smiled, sweet and poisonous, and turned away as if Lucia was already forgotten. The negotiations concluded quickly after that. Fair terms, balanced agreements, everything Kael's pack needed to thrive. When Rex and his entourage finally departed, the Great Hall erupted in celebration. Council members clapped Lucia's shoulder, praised her brilliance, welcomed her as their Luna with genuine warmth. But Lucia couldn't shake the image of Seraphina's face, the cold promise in those ice-blue eyes. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chapter 7, Our Queen. The celebration spilled into the corridors, wolves laughing and toasting Lucia's name like it had always belonged among them. She moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting congratulations she barely heard, her mind still caught in that council chamber where she'd gambled everything on half-remembered history. And won. Brilliant, Lord Brennan said for the third time, his earlier skepticism completely vanished. Absolutely brilliant. Elder Garrett pressed a glass of wine into her hands. You've got your grandfather's mind for strategy, girl. He'd be proud. The words settled warm in her chest. Her father had never spoken much of his own father, but she'd always sensed respect there. Legacy, something she'd thought forever beyond her reach. Thank you, she managed, though her voice felt distant. The crowd shifted, and suddenly the Queen Mother stood before her. The noise seemed to dim, everyone sensing the weight of this moment. Kael's mother looked different, softer. The armor she wore like skin had cracked, revealing something raw beneath. Walk with me, she said quietly. It wasn't a request. Lucia followed her through the palace to a small balcony overlooking the valley. Night had fallen, stars scattered across velvet sky, and the cool air tasted of pine and possibility. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I judged you," the Queen Mother finally said. "From the moment Kael spoke your name, I decided you weren't enough, that you'd embarrass us, fail us." Her voice cracked. "I was so certain I knew what this pack needed." Lucia's throat tightened. "You wanted to protect your son." "I wanted to control him." The older woman turned, and tears gleamed in her eyes. "I wanted him safe in a marriage that made political sense, that couldn't hurt him. But watching you these past weeks," she broke off, shaking her head. "You gave away your wages to help Anna's mother. You learned in a month what takes others years. You stood before Alpha Rex without flinching and saved us all." She reached out, taking Lucia's hands in hers. The touch was warm, maternal. "I was wrong about you," she whispered. "So completely wrong. You aren't just good enough for my son, for this pack. You're exactly what we need, what we've always needed." Tears spilled over. "You are our queen, Lucia, in every way that matters." Something broke open in Lucia's chest. All the fear, all the doubt, all the years of believing she was invisible, worthless. It shattered beneath the weight of this acceptance. "I'm terrified I'll disappoint you," she admitted. "You won't." Kael's mother pulled her into an embrace, and Lucia melted into it, into this gift she'd never expected. "And even if you stumble, we'll be here. You're not alone anymore. You're family." Family, the word she'd lived without for so long. Lucia clung to her, tears soaking into royal silk, and let herself believe it might be true. When they returned to the great hall, Lucia's gaze found Kael immediately. He stood with his council members, but his eyes had been tracking the door, waiting for her. When he saw his mother's arm linked with hers, saw their identical tear-stained smiles, his entire face transformed. Relief, joy, love so fierce it stole her breath. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Lucia into his arms, uncaring of propriety or audience. "Are you all right?" She nodded against his chest. "Better than all right." His mother squeezed her shoulder once, then melted into the crowd, giving them space, giving them this moment. "I need to show you something," Kael murmured against her hair. "Come with me." He led her through corridors she'd cleaned 1,000 times, upstairs she'd scrubbed on her knees, until they reached a tower she'd never been permitted to enter. His private sanctuary. The room was simple but beautiful. Wide windows overlooking the forest, shelves of books, a fire crackling in the hearth. Kael closed the door, and suddenly they were alone. Truly alone, without council members or servants or watching eyes. "When this started," he said, turning to face her, "it was strategy, a solution to a political problem." He stepped closer. "But somewhere between that first council meeting and tonight, it became real. You became real. Not a piece on a board, but the woman I want beside me for every decision, every challenge, every moment." Lucia's heart hammered. "Kael." "Let me finish." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing her cheeks. "I asked you once to play a role, to pretend for Alpha Rex, but I'm not asking that now." His voice dropped, rough with emotion. "I'm asking you, Lucia, not as strategy, not as arrangement, but as a man who loves you beyond reason. Will you be my mate? My Luna, my queen, for real, forever?" The question hung between them, terrifying and beautiful. Lucia looked at him, really looked. At the Alpha who'd seen a maid and chosen her anyway. Who'd trained her with patience, defended her with ferocity, loved her with a tenderness that made her believe in futures she'd never dared imagine. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd spilled wine in that council chamber. She'd faced down Alpha Rex, earned the Queen Mother's blessing, proven herself to the pack and, more importantly, to herself. She'd found her strength, her place, her home. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes to all of it, forever." Kael's kiss was gentle at first, reverent, like she was something holy. But when she pulled him closer, tangling her fingers in his hair, it deepened into something desperate and claiming. A promise written in touch and breath, and the thundering of 2 hearts finally beating as one. When they broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he whispered. "My queen, my Lucia." I love you too, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Outside, the pack celebrated. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms before the fire, Kael and Lucia began writing their future. Not as alpha and arrangement, not as duty and political necessity, but as two wolves who'd found each other against impossible odds and chosen love anyway. The maid had become a queen, and the queen had found her king. Together, they would rule with compassion and strength, building a legacy that had nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with the courage to see worth where others saw nothing. Their story was just beginning,